keeps being this point where I want to cry. As a scholar of violence and trauma, there's these moments where I don't know what to do. Where everything is so chaotic and overwhelming that I can't think. It's not even that I can't work analytic in the problem, I can't think at all. So I thought I'd talk about that today, and to try and see if there's a way of making sense of it. So I study violence. I try and conceptualize violence. A lot of people research violence. I don't really research violence. I try to conceptualize it, because I think that the fundamental mistakes we're making in the field of violence are around at the level of even understanding what we mean when we use the word violence at all. I think that there's a lot of research, very productive, very interesting, very important, but it's before that. It's the moment before that of trying to say, what kind of thing are we even imagining when we imagine violence? But when we study violence, we are also necessarily studying trauma. And it's not just that we're studying trauma. It's not just we have to bring in the field of trauma studies, the analytics of trauma, but the study of violence is also in a real and immediate way an experience of trauma. You cannot be a scholar in the field of violence without being a person who experiences trauma in the world. And that's really what I'm trying to see if I can make sense of. So in one sense, this talk is about representations of violence. This is a kind of theoretical, conceptual talk. It's also one of my only pieces of work that isn't about South Africa. This is very unusual. I'm going to talk about a case that happens in the other violent place, the US. Partly just because it was so interesting, partly because even being in South Africa, where we're part of a globalized media universe, which is impinged on by these multiple accounts that happen all over the surface of the earth, but are somehow part of our kind of immediate imaginary. And partly also just to get a bit of conceptual distance, because when we work on violence in South Africa, there's so much of our own history and immediacy in it that can become overwhelming. And this example is a little bit abstract in a way that is perhaps helpful and perhaps not. So why I do this is because representations do work. That you know, often people, when they think we're talking conceptually about representation, like it's just about like, well, how is it becomes a kind of a formal abstract account of how something is described. I'm interested in the work done by representations, that the way in which you talk about anything, the way in which you imagine anything, the way in which you speak or write about anything has immediate effects on people and their social relations, which means it has effects on the society and the future of the society and the direction of the transformations that are always happening in societies. And I realized recently, it was actually only in the last few months, I've been asking myself this question: why do I work on violence? It's just horrible. I mean, I've spent my life specializing in horrible things, and I wanted to understand a bit better why I did that. And it seems to me that the major reason is that the discourses of violence are possibly the biggest domain of misrepresentation. There's a lot of areas which are highly prone to misrepresentation, like politics. But it seems that there's something particularly going on in the space of accounts of violence, where what is going on is being misrepresented. And one of the things that makes me happy is that the kind of emerging generation has really appropriated in the digital domain a conceptual account of this in the notion of gaslighting. Really makes me very happy that people on the internet talk about gaslighting now in a way that they didn't 5 years ago, that they didn't when I was a student. because the notion of gaslighting gets at the heart of this question of misrepresentation. The idea of gaslighting is someone who's being abusive to you, misrepresenting the way they are abusing you. Someone who has power over you, representing that power as if you are the problem, they are not the problem. It's a process of mystification that not only mystifies abuse, it's abusive in itself. The very process of gaslighting is a form of abuse, okay? And it seems to me that generally the term gaslighting is talked about in relationships, like in intimate relationships, like this partner is gaslighting that partner. And I want to really blow that open and say that gaslighting should be taken as a fundamental conceptual term to talk about all relations of power and all exercises of inequality of power and thus of violence. And so that's part of what I'm thinking about today. But I want to talk about this little story, okay? And it's this happened last year at the Robb Elementary School in Texas in the US on the 24th of May at about 11:30 in the morning. And just to advise you on the content, I'm going to be talking about extreme violence. I'm not going to show you images of the violence itself, but it's going to create conditions of you imagining a situation of very extreme violence. What happened at 11:30 on the 24th of May is that a graduate of this primary school walked into the school building and shot 36 fourth grade students, killing 19 of them, and also killed 2 of the teachers. And I think it's important to actually pause for a moment and to actually consider Nevada Bravo, Jacqueline Cesares, McKenna Elrod, Jose Flores Jr., Elia Garcia, Isaiah Garcia, Emery Garza, Xavier Lopez, JC Lavanos, Tess Marta, Miranda Mathis, Alethea Ramirez, Annabelle Rodriguez, Meta Rodriguez, Alexandria Ruba, Leila Lazarova, Jayla Seguero, Elia Torres, Rogerio Torres, Irma Garcia, and Eva Morales. And one of the reasons I want us to consider each of those children and their 2 teachers is as a counter discourse in the representation of violence, because whenever we represent violence, we represent the aggressor. We always know the names of the offenders, we always know the names of the criminals, we always know the names of the masterminds, the abusers. But what gets erased as part of the violence is not just the lives of these children, but the knowledge of them, their sense that they are actually what this is about. Now, I want to show you this video. And that's the moment I don't know what to do with. Okay, this is a moment where I stop knowing how to think. I kind of wake up every morning and I study violent stuff and I read social media feeds. My social media feeds are tweaked to give me all the accounts of the worst violence that's going on in the world. And I then try and make conceptual sense of it. And what's interesting to me is the moment. Roland Barthes, in his theory of representation, he's talking about photography. He talks about the punctum, the moment, the bruising, the moment where the photographic image pierces your heart. And there's a kind of a intensity, there's a kind of a breach of the idea that this is just a representation of of something external. And for me, it's really interesting. It's not in the images. It's not in the images of this student walking down the corridor of his own school. It's here. It's editor's note. And I'm really interested in that editor's note. And that's all I want to talk to you about today. I just want to talk to you about the fact that an editorial team of a local newspaper in a small town next to the small town where this happened, decided to release this video, this CCTV footage. Very controversial decision, which was widely attacked afterwards. And in making the decision to release this video to the public, to put it on the internet so that the global community would have access to it, that people like us in South Africa would be able to watch it, but so would the parents of those children be able to watch it. So would their families, their friends, their grandparents, everyone would be able to see this footage. And they made it, so they had to make a really difficult decision about should this be seen at all? And how should it be seen? And this seems to be really interesting because there's multiple decisions about representation happening here. Firstly, what footage gets shown? There's more than an hour. If you have got nothing better to do with your life, there's more than an hour of CCTV footage relating to this incident, starting from before this young man even enters the school grounds. But they decide to focus on this. They decide to focus on the moment of his entry into the building. He's walking down the corridor. He goes into the classroom. Presumably, there's also CCTV cameras in the classroom. A decision was made not to allow you access to that footage. Okay, so very, very clear differentiation there between him walking down the corridor and what takes place in the room that we see him enter. But even more than that, it seems to me something really interesting is going on here. So the idea of that there's a consensus around the idea that there's a consensus around what should be, what is and is not an acceptable way of communicating with you about violence. And it's very, very subtle in this case, because it's not just, okay, we don't want to see what happened in that room. But we also don't want to hear what happened in that room. But it's not even that we don't want to hear what happened in that room. We want to hear part of what happened in that room and not the other part. And this seems an incredibly fine line of distinction. The fact that you hear the gunfire, so the audio is not removed, which would be possibly the standard first line of engagement. But the sound of children screaming has been removed. And at this point, I can bring 20 years of media theory, of critical social analysis, of being a trauma survivor into this and give you an analytic framework. But what I really want to do at this point is I want to do one of two things. I want to walk my dog on the beach, or I want to read poetry. My dog's not here, so I'm going to read you a poem. Polisi Nyezwa, it's from the same region that Pumbla and I are from, the Eastern Cape. He says, I cannot think of all the pains. I cannot think of all the pains in men's breasts without the urge to sleep or lie down. I cannot think without seeing God's face in a child's smile, or in the lonely cry in the night, or in the sea. I cannot think of all the pains that have come and gone, pains in men's waists and in their shoes. I cannot have relief proper wearing a neat tie. I run around in circles like sprinkling water. I cannot have true relief, swearing out loud and counting out all the pains in my breast and in my pants. I cannot think of all the pain and all the years wasted, all the craze of lonely men in village rooms and all the bodies that lie out in the cold in avoided streets. I can't run out old like a joyful child. And watch a sky pregnant with pain or with turbulent rain. I cannot think of the soil without lying down. I cannot think of tears, lonely geographies, and the third world without the urge to cry or to sit down. And that's really what this talk is about. It's about the urge to cry or sit down. And the place of that urge in the life of the scholar of violence and trauma. And of how we not only find a language to talk about that, not only how we find a conceptual language to talk about that, but how we find a performative genre to communicate that, to be in that space, how we can simultaneously be academics, how we can be social analysts, how we can be social researchers, which are highly formal roles. And one of the things that's built into those roles is notions of objectivity, notions of neutrality, notions of kind of abstract disengagement from a material in a way that does not seem to work when we're working on materials of this kind and problems of this nature. So I'm trying to think and to find not just a theoretical analytic framework, but also a mode of being to talk about this. At the same time, I want to do some really, really tight theoretical conceptual analysis. So I want to talk about the sound of screaming children being removed in terms of a kind of politics of representation that took place. And it would have been a moment in a specific newsroom that I described to you before, small town next to the small town where the killings happened. Journalists are sitting making a decision, and the decision is informed by multiple motives, some of them particularly banal. One of the motives is financial. That's the first and overriding motive, is that they are in the business, they are in the work, they are in the money-earning project of journalism. So they want clicks. So they need media on their website that is going to get clicks, because if it gets clicks, it gets advertising revenue. Okay, so they're trying to make money out of this. That's one of the things guiding this representation. On the other hand, they are also facing certain problems. The nature of the material means that it's volatile, that it can go either way. Celebrity drama can only really go one way. It just, you get the clicks. With stuff that is violent and traumatic, there's an intrinsic instability that you can say that people can want to avoid it rather, that they can get a sense of like, well, that looks interesting. No, I'm definitely not going to go down that tunnel. So there's a sense of like, well, how provocative does it have to be? How confrontational does it have to be? So that it can stay within that realm of the incitement of the click, while not crossing over into the realm of the horrific, of the thing that has to be avoided, of the thing like, I don't want that in my news feed. There's this kind of new age thing, like, I don't watch the news anymore. Like, I don't want those bad vibes. And I feel that, I feel people who've made that choice. I think it's the wrong choice, but I understand the vibe of that choice. And it's an important thing that these journalists would have been thinking about, is like, how far can we push this? How extreme can we make it that it's not too extreme? I mean, can we get into Game of Thrones kind of territory, or where's this thing going to flip over and it becoming a thing that is aversive to people? Okay. The other thing we have to understand here is that there's a massive politics preceding this incident, and that's what's really important. So what you've seen is an isolated incident. It is part of a national culture. A national culture which we're all aware of in the US of school shootings. These are an intrinsic part of the culture of the US. And the reason they are has to do with something very, very specific, because the US is the place where most people have the most guns. That most of the private firearms in the world are in the hands of private citizens in the US. And they're only 4% of the global population. It's totally crazy. And part of it is because there's an intense politics of the right to bear arms, which incidentally, that phrase does not mean the right to own a firearm. It's been politically reinscribed as if it means that. And what happened before, 20 years before this, does the name Sandy Hook mean anything to most people? You know Sandy Hook. Wasn't 20 years. Sandy Hook was the other big primary school shooting where lots of very, very young kids got murdered by a school shooter. And what happened after Sandy Hook is that, given the emergent culture of kind of fake news, the emergent culture of televisual shock jocks who just make up lies in order to kind of incite people into paranoid conspiracy theories in order to get the clicks from doing that. Alex Jones, who's one of the most egregious bastards of the US media world, constructed the Sandy Hook conspiracy theory specifically around that, around the idea that Sandy Hook never happened. Okay, this is a really, really critical conspiracy theory. So all these little children were murdered at school, and Alex Jones is like, no, this never happened. And he made up the term crisis actors. He said that the people you're seeing in the video, the parents weeping in the street, these are crisis actors. And he talks. That this gets constructed as a huge part of political discourse, because if Sandy Hook really happened, then there's a reason to restrict private gun ownership. So that's what the whole conspiracy theory is about. For Alex Jones, it's also about the clicks, and he made hundreds of millions of dollars out of this conspiracy theory. So the important thing with Sandy Hook is that it that it functions politically as a tool of the gun lobby, which is inseparable from the Republican Party, which is inseparable from conservative economic interests in the US. And so it's a highly functional conspiracy theory that serves a lot of elite groups in a very, very powerful way. The fact that it's just totally crazy isn't really a decisive factor. And this is something we haven't understood about fake news, that its craziness, its absolute delinking from reality is no impediment to its circulation and the fact that people take it up emotionally and identify with it. So anyway, so Sandy Hook happens, the conspiracy theory happens, and these journalists are in this very moment, are in the history of the Sandy Hook conspiracy theory. They'll be critically aware in that moment that there will be a political mobilization to say that Uvalde never happened. And that part of them as ethical journalists is to lay down evidence to say, yes, look, it happened. So they're trying to give you as much evidence as they can that this is true, okay? But at the same time, they can't overstep the bounds. To really show you that it was true, they would show you the footage in the classroom. They would show you the kids rushing to the one side of the room, crouching each other. They would have shown you the 11-year-old girl who wiped her friend's blood over her body and tried to hide under the pile of bodies. They would have shown you that. But that is unreprehensible. You cannot show people that. That exceeds people's tolerance of what they can bear. That you've gone deeply into the realm of the unbearable, of the unimaginable. the point at which experience breaks down in trying to contain accounts of things. And so there we get this key issue, is that we're working at this moment of instability between around the pragmatics of telling the truth. That if we want to tell the truth about things that aren't nice, how do we tell it? How do we code that? What visual images, what audio recordings, what explanatory accounts are possible, so that we can take people as far into empirical exposure to just how terrible things really are, without then introducing the kind of psychodynamic flip, the invocation of the defense mechanism, where they have to disavow, where they have to be like, no, I cannot, no bad vibes. Okay, I don't want that in my news feed. Okay, so we're working, and this is the moment I'm interested in, that this is a moment that we are working in as scholars in this field all the time, but it's also the moment we're working in as human beings all the time, that we're always working in this moment of like, this is unendurable. I cannot survive as a human being with this knowledge. I need to not have it. Okay, which is, of course, I mean, in one sense, I imagine it's a very psychodynamic process, the process of psychodynamic repression, but it's also absolutely critically a structural process. It's the process of the culture creating forms of expression, norms of journalism that allow that tipping point to be negotiated. What does journalistic ethics say is tolerable here? What our focus groups tell us is the tipping point where people will turn against us rather than clicking our website. And so all of that is happening, and it's happening all the time. And what I want to talk about is not just all of that. All I'm doing is describing a scenario leading up to a theoretical question, which I'm now ready to ask. And this is the theoretical question, which of course is only a theoretical question because it's an ethical question, is what work does that do? What work does that choice, that problem of the border, the beyond here are monsters, the boundary beyond which we cannot go. What work does our practice of maintaining that border do? What does it do in the world? What does it do for us? What does it do to everyone else around us? Now, I'm not going to go over this because Pumla has totally written the decisive thing on this in A Human Being Died That Night. There's the chapter where she talks about the two women appearing at the Truth Commission, and the one is just bursting to tell her the story of her terrible suffering and violence, and there's the woman who is angry and retreats to the back of the hall and doing there's silence and an anger, and she doesn't want to talk about it. And in that work, Pumla elaborates Judith Herman's kind of dialectic of trauma notion about the oscillation between trauma being overwhelming and wanting to come out, wanting to tell its story, and trauma always being kind of repressed and silenced, and how we're always in that space. So go back and read that again if you haven't read it already. It's fantastic. So I don't want to repeat that, and there isn't space and time for me to do that. But I want to talk about this moment of where essentially something is so terrible that we can only fall into two responses to it. The response of just being too intense. That moment, the moment that I opened this talk with, the moment where sometimes I just want to cry. Or the moment where Polisi Miezo just, he talks about, he just wants to lie down. So the moment of being crippled by chaotic intensity such that you cannot function, or the defense against that, which is to dissociate and simply not be able to engage a thing at all because it has to be not part of your experiential and conceptual world. Like how do we work with that moment? How do we work with that, with the problem of the breakdown of the capacity to represent experience? And it's a problem in the domain of violence and trauma. That's where it happens, that we are working with this point of the breaking down of the capacity to represent experience. And as Herman points out in her seminal classic, Trauma and Recovery, one of the things about trauma, well, the first thing she points out is the unspeakability and the silencing that is invoked by trauma. But she also identifies something else that is so fundamentally important, is that one of the traumatic experiences of trauma is not just the helplessness and terror that she describes so articulately, but the way in which it breaks down the bonds between people, that the notion of the moment of that terrible experience, one of the most terrible things about it is that you can only ever have that experience on your own, is that there's something about that experience that you can't tell someone about it. I have this experience working in Australia on a daily basis. I start telling them a South African anecdote and I see the horror on their faces. And I'm like, yeah, I'd better stop telling this story now, because these people don't know about this stuff in the world. They live in a different kind of universe where bad stuff like that doesn't happen, wanting to tell them the Fort Hare Vice Chancellor attempted assassination and they killed his bodyguard instead of him. And I start the story with and so and his bodyguard, and they're like, they can't even get to that. They can't even like, what do you mean? The Vice Chancellor of a university has a bodyguard? Like, that's how far they are from imagining it. But my point being that it's in exactly this moment where you cannot have, you can't go down that road. The thing is too much for anyone else. It's so it's unbearable for you, but it happened anyway. It's unbearable to other people, so you cannot actually explain it to them. Because you cannot explain it to them, the shared understanding of experience is broken. There's a fundamental break, a fundamental alienation that happens in the unshareability and the unrepresentability of the experience. And of course, linked to that is the problem of kind of secondary or vicarious trauma, that I stopped telling my colleagues overseas these stories because I realize I'm harming them. It's actually violent for me to tell them those stories. It does damage to them, and so I stop. And this idea that what we're doing in this field is not only are we exposing ourselves to the violent effects of the knowledge of the things in our field, but we're always at risk of harming others by wanting to include them in that and make them insiders to that really brutalizing knowledge. So all of these are really the fundamental problems of being a scholar in this field, and I want to talk about it in relation to this kind of distant problem and the problem of representation. Now, one of the things, before I showed you that video, I said, look, I'm not going to show you the images of violence, but you're going to imagine the violence. And surely you did imagine that violence, and surely it was shocking for you. But what's interesting is the politics around trigger warnings, around that. Those of us who work in the trauma field, we put content descriptors on things because we know that knowing or imagining things harms people. But of course, you've got a mobilization, you've got this kind of resurrection of a certain kind of authoritarian, masculine political conservatism, symbolized in the figure of Jordan Peterson, and this idea of you know, that we've all gone soft now. We all are, you know, it's just, we're all snowflakes, we're all crybabies, we all got spoiled by our parents. And you know, that the, you know, we all need to toughen up. We all need to harden up a bit. And so the attempt to reinsert a kind of notions of masculinity, notions of a kind of dissociated, unaffected, invulnerable subject, especially in academia. And one of the things that's interesting about it is this is a burden, I describe it in terms of masculinity, that is placed specifically on female scholars, because the female scholars have to be more masculine than masculine scholars. Otherwise, they're going to be feminine. Otherwise, they're going to be like swooning and fainting and weeping in their offices and confirming every reason why scholarship should be a masculine domain and shouldn't be non-gendered. So this is all happening in terms of a kind of a politics of invulnerability, and once again, the thing that I'm so excited about on the internet is people are asserting their right to be vulnerable. Young people are creating a discursive field of articulate vulnerability in a way which is kind of amazing, which is kind of transcended where psychologists and trauma theorists are working. The kind of popular culture has just run ahead of the scholarship in the field, but it's a fight, and it's particularly in the US, which is why this example is interesting to me. It's a culture war. There's a fight between the right of vulnerable people to present their vulnerability versus the kind of invocation of these kind of regressive masculinities. And one of the key sort of ways in which it's fought over, and this is particularly in the American domain, is around the notion of freedom, the freedom to say what I want to say, which means two completely different things. The one is the freedom to be a human being, to express my feelings, to describe what my history, to have people, to communicate with people about who I am and what I'm going through, that freedom. But it's also then conscripted into another kind of freedom, which is the freedom of bullies, the freedom of machismo, the freedom of thuggery, the freedom of repression, the freedom of silencing vulnerable people. And that's seen as, and so that's the Jordan Peterson freedom, is like I'm not going to use your pronouns, I'm not going to let you use trigger warnings, because I just have this intrinsic historical right to over. And so that's a really, really important articulation of freedom. And of course, it happens in different contexts. And even in South Africa, people sometimes invoke culture as a way of exercising that kind of freedom, repressive freedom, the freedom to continue abusing vulnerable people. So this is really central because when we start talking in that way, it starts being clear that these are not just psychological processes. These have to do with systemic forms of political organization and culture. And so what we're trying to grasp here is this idea of the right to speak, the ability to speak versus the risk of being silenced, as being fundamental in terms of the kind of politics of being human, but also fundamental in terms of the experience of trauma. Right? And one of the important things that really comes out of survivor work and victim work is the importance of the articulation of the victim's story, the importance of the acceptance, the recognition, the creation of support communities, of people collectively being able to say, me too. Just an incredibly, like for two words to have conveyed that much power, just the simple words, me too. Someone first said me before anyone else said me too. That saying of me, this happened to me, this is real, this was my experience. Everyone denied it, everyone lied about it, everyone turned away, but this is me. And then other people were able to say me too. And suddenly an entire cultural formation emerged that made it possible for a transformative empowerment social process for survivors. Okay, and to understand that it's both the struggle of the traumatized person to find voice, but it's also the shifting of the boundary of representability such that everyone can now say it. It's so that versus 5 years ago, there's a kind of experience of sexual violence and sexual harassment, which you can just talk about now. You can just say out loud that happened in a way that people, your parents' generation, it was unimaginable to say that thing. No good could come of making that claim. Okay, and this is exactly what we're doing. And so one of the things that I see us doing as scholars of violence and trauma is extending the boundaries of narratability. Okay, we are shifting what can be said. We're shifting the domain. You know, there's this famous Freudian quote. He says, where id is, there ego shall be. It is a work of culture, like the construction, I forget what word, the pushing back of the zeta z. I mean, essentially means the creation of the dikes that hold back the sea in the creation of Holland. Okay, but it's about these things that are hidden, these things that are repressed. These can be claimed into our collective space. They can be brought into these rooms that we all acknowledge. Them. But in doing that, and this is really my final points that I'm making for today, is as we do that, we realize that there are multiple and competing kind of interests and conflicts going on here. And when those journalists were making the decision to say, yes, we want to show the footage of him walking down the school corridor, but we will not show the footage of the classroom. We're going to show the sounds of the gunfire. We're going to record the sounds of the gunfire, but we're not going to record the sounds of the screaming children. Okay, they were imagining audiences. They were imagining there's different people, and I already described some of them. What does this mean as me as a kind of voyeur in South Africa, you know, concerned about gun violence, school killings? What does it mean for the friends of those children? You know, one of the worst things about the Sandy Hook story is one of the kids who was there when all his friends were killed. Was in the room. He watched all these school kids, all these school friends getting killed. And his parents were Fox News watchers, and they watched Alex Jones, and they believed Alex Jones. And so they started telling their traumatized son that he was lying about what happened at school that day when all these kids, when friends were murdered. I think about that a lot. I think about that moment a lot, because that moment captures for me this problematic of audiences. That moment captures this question of like, who's doing what when what story is being told? Okay. So who is this good for? This is my question. Who is an account good for? Okay. So when you say, okay, showing the guy walking in the school, showing the sound of the gunfire, that's good, because that is going to help people acknowledge that this really happened. Okay, it's going to stop the next Alex Jones conspiracy theory. It's going to stop the next Sandy Hook conspiracy theory. But it's also going to do something else. So some of those kids, their friends, their families are going to click on this link and they're going to see it. And it's going to be an incredibly violating experience for them. It's going to be a violent, traumatic experience for them. And that's happening simultaneously. And so this decision is being balanced there. But part of what I want to do in my work is to push this and to try and work out how we balance our concern with the immediacy and intimacy of immediate victims and violence. And to say, well, what what work do these representations do? Because which ones do the best work? Which ones actually help us address the problem, which is why we do this work of how we can reduce violence in the future. Okay. And there's a fundamental there's a problem I can't solve here, because there's a small community of children who are murdered. There's a slightly large community of their families. There's a slightly larger community of the people who live in that town. But there's a very much bigger community of every other child going to school in the US, and every parent and every friend of every one of those children. That's a much, much, much bigger community. That's a community that's been running into the hundreds of millions. And we also have to act in the best interests of that community. And it seems to me that what I can't solve is that the interests of the immediate community, say the grandmother of one of those deceased children, and the community of every parent in the US sending their children to school every single day, actually have conflicting representational needs. Because what every other parent needs is for the school shootings to stop. And for the school shootings to stop, what we need is an absolute, visceral, inescapable confrontation with just how bad this really is. There's this kind of, and part of me has this double feel. Part of me wants to rub people's faces in this stuff. Like every day, part of me wants to just get up and say, you need to know about it. It's not okay to lead your life in denial, in ignorance. And being a white person growing up in apartheid, this is a really, really, really intense part of that experience. It's part of like wanting to say to people, stop lying about what's going on. Okay, and part of me still lives with that and has that impulse and is driven by the impulse to say, no, you have to, whether you like it or not, you have to know this, because you are harming people by pretending you don't know. On the other hand, part of me as a trauma studies scholar is like, vicarious traumatization is a very real and very terrible thing that we do to ourselves and each other every single day, and we need to be mindful of it. We need to not be Jordan Peterson. We need not to be the guy who says like trigger warning. We need to be the person who's like understands that even the little things we do, even the sharing of information is it is potentially triggering, is potentially harmful, is potentially destructive. Not only that, not only is the ethics of that, but there's also this problem of the instability that even if you feel it's right to do it, even if you feel it's important to share that, there's this moment in which the dissociation with the defense, the ideological kind of closing down of the narratability kicks in. And so you trigger the unknowability by pushing it too far. You make people retreat into complete denialism, like by and so it becomes a tactical thing of how far you can go. Like, how far can you say, look, we need to know about this, but I need to present it to you in a way that's not just going to make you kind of shut down cognitively, effectively, emotionally, so that in fact, so that no actual human communication is possible in this context anymore. And this is why I use in the title of the talk the notion of conundrums, is because I'm stuck there, because I'm really, really stuck with the pragmatics of the fact that there isn't a rule, that there isn't a simple like, oh yes, when we analyze all the steps, we arrive at conclusion X. Instead, what I'm left with is that we are living on this tightrope all the time. We're balancing, and we're always tipping to one side and then overcorrecting to the other side and then tipping back. And so that the work of being a violence and trauma scholar is really the work of this tightrope walk. And it's not just a tightrope walk. A tightrope walker is always in danger. They're always in danger of falling, and that's the fascination of them. But the problem is that as we walk on this tightrope, we are walking in communities. And we are always carrying with us the risk of either harming people through one kind of representation or harming people through a failure to represent violence and trauma. And that's the kind of space that I'm wanting us to just sit with and try and think about.